Numbers 3 to 5 Porchester Terrace stand as an enigmatic memorial to John Claudius Loudon, the most significant author of his time, on landscape, architecture, horticulture and garden design. The back garden's been built over, but the front garden of the property is well cared for and little changed since he died in 1843. The small, beautiful domed conservatory is of great significance as a prototype for the iron sash bar, and thus for all the glass and steel construction of the 19th, 20th and 21st centuries. I've discussed Loudon's influence on urban planning and landscape architecture in another video. The numbering of the property, 3 to 5, suggests 3 houses, probably because Loudon took the lease on 3 plots of land. The central windows on the second floor are a conceit. They're painted but unglazed walls. Loudon described the property as a double detached house. We'd call it semi-detached, and it became a significant influence on the popularity of this house type and on the use of Victorian gardens for ornamental and scientific horticultural collections. John, Jane and Agnes Loudon lived in number 3. Number 5 was let to a tenant in the early years and then occupied by Loudon's mother and his sisters. Like Jane, the sisters helped with the publishing enterprise, which was run from the Gardener's Magazine office on the east front, overlooking the garden. The boundary wall was flued, heated by a stove under the garden shed, and had what Paxton later called a conservative wall, glazed and used to grow hothouse fruits. The Porchester Terrace garden had many experiments and innovations. John Ruskin, who wrote for Loudon in his mid-teens, visited the garden office and described it as a chaos of literary confusion. But as one of Loudon's assistants wrote, his master could at any time put his hand upon any book or paper that he might want, even in the dark. The room contained a great many books, minerals, crystals and architectural relics, including a Gothic altar and a Corinthian capital from Tivoli, presumably from Hadrian's villa. I wonder if it's now in the Soane Museum. Based on Jane Loudon's books and Agnes Loudon's diaries, B. Howe wrote an account of Jane's arrival at Porchester Terrace after their wedding in 1831. Here are some excerpts. On 14th September, Jane arrived at one of the 2 arched entrances overhung with leafy branches in Porchester Terrace. It was to be her home for 28 years. They reached a shallow flight of steps set between a pair of stone pedestals decorated by stone urns that led to a veranda above. Around its pillars twined a mass of China roses, a wisteria sinensis, jasmines and japonicas. In between the veranda panels of open ironwork, Loudon kept narrow boxes filled with seasonal plants, which were immediately changed after flowering. They passed into the circular conservatory that bulged out of the front of the house, in shape rather like an onion. Conservatories were Loudon's delight. A greenhouse, orangery or conservatory ought, if possible, to be attached to every suburban residence, he told his clients. Noticing her rapt gaze, Loudon showed Jane how his camellias were displayed in pots before a glass-panelled door. So every bloom was doubled by means of clever reflection. This optical delusion afforded Loudon great amusement, as it usually took in visitors when they gazed into the conservatory from the garden below. No illustrations of the planting survive, but Jane worked hard in the garden and published many books which were beautifully illustrated with flower paintings. I think they show her taste rather than her husband's. In John's words, his object was to build 2 small houses which should appear as one, and have some pretensions to architectural design, being at the same time calculated for invalids, and therefore furnished with verandas extending nearly round the whole building, for taking exercise in inclement weather. Therefore, it will perhaps be difficult to find any person but ourselves to whom a garden treated as ours has been would be suitable, because the end that we had in view was scientific knowledge rather than ordinary enjoyment. In an area smaller than 2 tennis courts, John grew 2,000 different plants instead of the 10,000 he believed he could have grown had he not planted specimens of almost all the kinds of trees and shrubs that could, in 1823 and 1824, be procured in the London nurseries. Our object being to allow the whole to grow up together as long as they could, in order to study the species and varieties. Additionally, he found space for 50 kinds of apples, nearly as many kinds of pears, and a corresponding number of plums and cherries, with some peaches, nectarines, apricots, figs, and vines. He also had a large collection of flowering plants, including 600 alpine plants in pots on a stone shelf. The labels were of porcelain, written on with Indian ink and varnished, those for the orders and tribes being a larger size than those for the specific names of the plants. John died in 1843, leaving Jane, as her father had done, with considerable debts. She also had an 11-year-old daughter, Agnes. Joseph Paxton helped to raise money for them from friends and admirers and the government, and Jane was soon earning her living by editing and writing. Today, her books command higher prices than his books, partly on account of her beautiful flower paintings printed by chromolithography, a technique that developed in the 1840s and which her husband would have loved. Each colour was printed from a separate block of stone. Jane has been described as the Mrs. Beeton of gardening. It's a pleasure to see both John and Jane's names on the commemorative blue plaque outside their fascinating home. It can be seen as a birthplace of modern landscape architecture.